I'm Montclair Community Church. Welcome to our Monday afternoon devotional. And today, I just want to go over a brief history of Israel and see how maybe that corresponds with what we're going through today. I'm going to leave you with a few questions for private reflection. So, a brief history of Israel, as we saw a few weeks ago in my devotion, God called Abraham and made some promises to him, and God himself confirmed these promises. And that was, of course, the spiritual seed, as we discussed. And this isn't the place to go into everything, but there was also part of that was a physical seed, which really pointed to the true Israel, which was Jesus. But we know that the nation of Israel came from Abraham. And we see in the nation of Israel, as soon as they go into the promised land, not long after that, when David becomes king and they're in their heyday, it didn't take long for them to fall away from the will of God. Beginning with David's son Solomon, who went after idols. Then under his son's reign, the kingdom was actually split into two, to Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And in 725 BC or thereabouts, we know that Assyria, which was the world power at that time, came and took Israel into exile. But God spared Judah. However, not long later, in 586 BC, about 140 years later, Judah had gone the same way that Israel had. They were disobedient to God. They stopped trying to be what God called them to be, and he sent them into exile in Babylon, who was the world power at that time. Ultimately, let's remember this exile was done by God because of Israel's failure to be who they were supposed to be. Well, about 7 years later, the Persians come on the scene and defeat the Babylonians, and Persia actually allows Israel to return from exile. So now here's Israel. They returned to a land that was much different than when they left it. Their whole world as a people had changed. Their way of life had been changed when they come back into the promised land. And the generation that comes in, they are determined to fix what their ancestors had done. This generation was ready to succeed in what God called them to be, where the previous generations had failed. And we read about this in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra. We see that Israel rebuilds the walls of the city. They want to reestablish themselves as God's people. They want to establish themselves as God's people, even though the rest of the world didn't want them to succeed. They rededicate themselves to the word of God. They wanted to hear with fresh ears after this exile. They wanted to hear with fresh ears what God in their new normal, term we hear a lot, in their new normal would reveal to them through his word. And they rededicated themselves to proper worship the way God prescribed. And they even started to rebuild the temple. They wanted to make the center of their worship what it should be, a sanctuary for God, the place where God dwelt on earth. And of course, we read in the last few books of the Old Testament, in the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, what actually happened. Pretty quickly, this next generation of Israel in their new normal started to grow complacent. They started to calm down in their lives, and you know what? That new normal started going back to the old normal before they knew it, and they were pretty comfortable with that. And they started to get distracted by the things of the world. They took their attention off of their mission as God's people. And we even read that they stopped, just plain stopped rebuilding the temple. Well, they just didn't have time. There was too much other stuff going on. And really, they revert back to their old ways as people. By the end of the Old Testament, where we read the admonitions that the prophet Malachi gives to the nation of Israel, we see they had gone back to their old ways as if the whole exile thing never happened. So now, before I apply this to us, I think that I need to give you two disclaimers. Number one, I am not comparing our current situation to theirs, okay? We are not being punished by God for something specifically we did as a nation. It's not a punishment of God against his people, whether this nation or the church. And we got to remember that Christ has now come, and all this national focus from the Old Testament, it's no longer valid. God's people now are among every nation and every tongue, and we are his spiritually by adoption, not by physical national heritage. And disclaimer number two is that, well, I'm going to paint with a very broad brush here. Not everything I'm about to say is every local church, and everything I'm about to say has anything to do with every Christian. But this is the idea. I want to generalize and leave it up to you. Seek God on this and decide, does this apply to you or not? Because if we follow the events, the daily briefings that all the leaders are so eager to bring us, you know this quarantine of ours that much of our country has been in is going to end soon. We are going to be released from our exile back into the world. We're going to get back to our new normal because the effects of this pandemic, they're going to be felt for a while. So this is going to be a new normal. So I have a message for the American church in 2020 because we've all heard about the opportunities that God was going to give us during the pandemic to be what he called us to be. We've already heard and are going to hear plenty about how we have a new opportunity now during the recovery in our country and in our world. As we all adapt to this new normal, will we be able to shine God's light into a dark world? We should come alongside those who are in need. We should show the grace and love of God, and we'll have opportunities to share the gospel. But I want to go in a different direction because we have a different opportunity here as God's people. Much like Israel came out of exile focused on their rebuilding of their community as God's people, and were recommitted to the worship of God, what will we, the church in America, do as the church and for the church? Will we embrace the opportunity to right the wrongs that American Christianity, by and large, has been perpetrating for the last 150 years? Will we seize the opportunity to consider how we are going to carry out our calling as God's people? How seriously we're going to take His word compared to what we were doing? How sincerely we're going to worship Him compared to what we were doing? How we are going to be committed to avoiding the errors we have made and been making? So now as we get to, and we've all wanted this so desperately, right? When we get to meet together again physically as His people, as those called out from the world, different from the world, called aside to be God's temple, His dwelling place. As we get to meet together, will our ideas change about something as simple as Sunday worship? Will our new normal be to meet together and worship together in spirit and truth and encourage each other as we see the day of Christ's return coming back? Will we be committed to doing this every week? Or will our new normal go back to our old normal before too long? Will our complacency win out? And if I have to pick a word to describe 21st century American church, I would go with complacent. Will we let ourselves be distracted from God, from what's most important, and focus ourselves on the things of the world? Will we revert back to what we were right before our own little exile began? Well, I encourage you. We have an opportunity now as we come back to refocus ourselves on worshiping God the way He wants to be worshiped, to get into His word and hear what He has to say like we never have before, to meet together and be the church in the way we are called to be the church. So I challenge you. I want you to decide, does any of what I've said this morning apply to you? And if so, what are we going to do about it?